What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you a meta-analysis for the November 2020 format. Phantom Rage has just been released, and with Maximum Gold right around the corner, I wanted to give you guys a preview of some of the top decks that have been performing in the competitive November format. We've had a few semi-large tournaments take place. Obviously, COVID's going on, so we're not going to be having any YCS scale type of events, but this will be a nice glimpse so you guys can take a look at the way the meta is trending, and that way prepare for any upcoming tournaments you might be competing in. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first and probably largest tournament we're going to be discussing the results from was the Pro Play Tour Regional that took place this past weekend. This had about 60 to 70 people in attendance, and I'm going to show you guys that top 8 breakdown right here on the screen. So for your top 8, you had 3 Dragon Link. That's not really too much of a surprise. We also had 1 Zodiac. We're going to definitely talk about this because this was actually the winner of the event. We had 1 Buster Blader. This is a nice rogue pick. We'll definitely discuss a little bit in depth. 1 Adamantipator. Adamantipator still hanging on. 1 Invoke Dogmaticum. Not really too surprised, as well as the 1 Infernoble Knight as well. So it seems like compared to our previous format, a lot of those same decks are topping, but we do have some other rogue picks to discuss as well. And we're going to, of course, start with Zodiac because Zodiac did, in fact, take first place. It looks like Zeus really amps up the power level of Zodiac, and it's really not a surprise because Zeus is an absolutely absurd card. Right now on the screen, you guys can see the deck list of the first place winner, and you can see this is very reminiscent of the old school days of Zodiac. It's very straightforward. There's a lot of actually cards that are throwbacks to the old Zodiac days, such as Solemn Strike. Solemn Strike's something we haven't seen too often, but having that spell speed 3 level of reactive capability to interact with your opponent is pretty good when you're trying to ensure that Zeus can resolve to shut down your opponent's hand traps. It gives you a way to make it so that your opponent can't interact with you, since, let's be honest, really no one's playing counter trapped at this point, unless they're playing like exclusively stun. But nonetheless, you see the other cards in here. He has other stuff like plenty of hand traps. He's actually playing Zoo King Alpha as well, a great way to interact with some of these powerful Dragon Link and Infernoble Knight boards. Just deciding to main deck it, I think that's perfectly acceptable. We also see Pot of Avarice in the main deck as well, a great way to just refuel all your resources and draw a couple of cards for your troubles, because Zodiac can typically load up the graveyard with 5 monsters no problem, and who doesn't love drawing more cards? One thing that really stands out to me about this deck is the Crystron Halki Fibrax package you see down in the extra deck. This is able to be exploited thanks to in part to Ash Blossom and Effect Veiler all being tuners, so at any point, if you still have a Zodiac monster on the field, you can then summon any of your hand traps if you still have them in your hand, and you basically have a way to go straight up into Access Code Talker and close the game out quickly. Typically, Zodiac's win condition is Zeus, and let's be real, Zeus is a powerhouse of a card, but if you want to close out the game and ensure it's not going to get prolonged so that your opponent can find an out to your Zeus or to whatever board you might present, then Access Code Talker is a nice clean way to do it, and I think this is going to be a trend that we're going to start to see a lot of moving forward, because anytime a control deck is able to incorporate this level of OTK potential, especially with how easily Zodiac can do it without taking away from its primary engine, that's just amazing, and it's really awesome to see that Anthony did that. So congratulations to him. He definitely deserved it. We're going to go ahead and move on to the second place deck list, which was, of course, Dragon Link. This shouldn't really be a surprise. Dragon Link is still one of the strongest decks of the format, as we saw from the previous format, and Dragon Link is still sitting in a very good position. When you look at this list, it looks pretty cookie cutter for the most part. There are some specific meta tech choices in here, but you know, aside from that, it's Dragon Link. I think what would be the most important thing to look at here is his specific hand trap lineup. He was running Ash Blossom, Gamma. Gamma's just a powerhouse in the format overall. DD Crow's a very interesting one, and then we also have Infinite Impermanence. And then in the side deck, he's got some Effect Veilers as well as some Lancias. He also has Jizukiru. You could kind of count this as a hand trap if you wish, because although it doesn't interact with your opponent on their turn, Kaijus are these types of cards that can really just remove any threat from the opponent's field, and you're going to see a few more Kaijus entering some main and side decks as we go through some of these lists. Moving on to top 4, we have Infernoble Knight. Again, one of the best decks from the previous format, is still going strong. Didn't really receive too many upgrades in Phantom Rage, but is still able to do what it does best, because anytime you have a deck that can rip cards out of your opponent's hand and set up a multi-negate field, that can do it by also playing through Disruption, by the way, you're going to obviously have yourself a tier 1 deck. Looking at this list, again, fairly standard. Some interesting observations are the Forbidden Droplet and the Dark Ruler No More main deck. It looks like Brian here was really trying to have options for going second, so that way he knew he could compete. And to be fair, Infernal Knight's a deck that can play very well going second already through some disruption, but just having stuff like Forbidden Droplet and Dark Ruler No More to ensure that he's able to set up his own board or break his opponent, or both simultaneously, that's a pretty nice way to hedge against if you do lose the die roll in the first game. And then going into games 2 and 3, you can feel pretty confident because you're going to at least go first for one of them. Then moving on to our other top 4 list, this is the deck that a lot of people are going to be interested in, Buster Blader. Now, Buster Blader's peeked its head out here and there as a result of Dragon Link being the top deck, but I don't think we've really seen a Buster Blader list that looks like this. This is very interesting. It's also incorporating the Dogmatica cards, which, why not? I mean, they're able to just present you with multiple negates going second and give you a way to kind of extend through some of your opponent's plays if they do interact with your traditional Buster Blader cards. You have Dragoon, which is a great card to fall back on, and if you can set up a lock with the Buster Blader Synchro monster as well as the Fusion monster, you know, sometimes it's very difficult for the opponent to play. And again, this deck did get top 4, and obviously playing through a field that was just dominated by meta, this player came prepared. Now, I would definitely say this is a rogue pick. I'm not sure if this is going to become meta anytime soon, but I would say keep an eye out on this one. Maybe start to learn the ins and outs of what some of these Buster Blader cards do, so that way if you do come across the strategy, you know how to interact with it and don't fall to it like a lot of players probably did in this tournament. Moving on to the top 8, we're starting off with another Dragon Link list. Again, pretty cookie cutter. I would say the notable changes here are the inclusion of 3 copies of Radiant and also main deck 3 triple tactical talents. A lot of people are still back and forth on this card. It can be amazing, but at the same time, it also does have its drawbacks because if your opponent doesn't play into it, the card becomes significantly weaker. But the 3 Radiant in the main deck is very interesting, and I'm curious if this is going to be a trend that's going to continue because we already saw some other players side decking Kaijus as well, and this did get top 8, so clearly there is some merit for it, but really interesting to see nonetheless. Up next is another Dragon Link list for you guys to look at, just so you guys can see some variety if you're interested in playing the Dragon Link deck. This one was actually main decking Nibiru. We saw a lot of side deck Nibiru because Nibiru is kind of hit or miss in terms of how powerful it can truly be. Sometimes it just wins the game automatically, and other times your opponent can play through it, and Dragon Link really doesn't have an issue doing that. So when that's the projected best deck of the format, some people might be hesitant to want to play it, but you still see the Gammas in the main deck. Infinite Impermanence has made its way in there as well, and other than that, it still looks like a pretty standard Dragon Link list. But again, just for variety and also so you can see some side deck choices, I wanted to make sure I included this. Next up, we have the lone Invoke Dogmatica list that managed to make the top 8. Again, pretty standard list overall, I would say, but I just love this deck so much because it's able to just play so many powerful cards that just generate you advantage. And again, it is more of a control deck. It's not going to blow your opponent up by building an unbreakable board, but if you can slow your opponent down just enough so that they are forced to play your game, Invoke Dogmatica can actually be a very scary deck, and it can take over the game rather quickly. And don't be surprised if you're going to see a lot of Invoke Dogmatica out there because a lot of people really love the way this deck plays. And so be mindful of the fact that you're going to see a lot of this deck whether you're playing in person or on the online ladder. And last but not least, we have another deck that just doesn't seem to die, and that deck is Adamancipator. Yes, a lot of people thought this deck was dead with the banning of Block Dragon, but here we go, ladies and gentlemen. It is still able to compete. This deck is still really powerful. I mean, Kwakimeru Guardian being able to shield you from all of your opponent's hand traps while you just combo off, it's insane. Now, the deck is a little bit more glass cannon than it used to be because Block Dragon definitely helped with a lot of the recovery. But we see in this deck list here, I mean, he's going all out. He's playing cards like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon just to be able to have an insurance policy in case his combo doesn't go through. He's even main decking stuff like Dark Ruler No More so that he can play second. We saw this very similarly to the Infernal Knight player. Red Reboot to play through traps. Imperial Order for going first. I mean, he's just playing so many different power cards here. Even Magical Midbreaker Field, just so, again, he has as many ways as possible to ensure that his combos can go off. And we already know the power of Adamancipator and what it's capable of doing. When it goes off, it rivals some of these top decks like Dragon Link and like Infernal Knight. So be a bit mindful that people are still playing with Adamancipator, so don't write the deck off just yet. But I think in terms of the combo tier ladder, I definitely think Adamantipator is a little bit lower than the Dragon Link and Infernoble Knight decks. Now, as we cover these deck lists, one thing to keep in mind is that this isn't going to necessarily reflect the entire meta as a whole. I mean, if you're playing in person versus online, that's going to be two completely different experiences, and we're never going to really be able to get a good grasp on the entire meta, because back in the day when we were just getting flooded with different tournament results, it was a lot easier to kind of tabulate and see these trends happening a lot more quickly. But since we're online now and since COVID's happening, it's a lot more difficult to do that because there's not as much data available. Now, that doesn't mean that with these results that we can't trend and see what's trending upward, what's leveling, and what's on a decline, but it's just going to happen at a much slower rate. But this will give you guys a great just little sample size to work with when you're doing your deck building for any tournament that you might compete in. Now, I want to pivot back to Zodiac, because Zodiac did take first place in the Pro Play Tour tournament, but it also took first place at another Phantom Rage box tournament, and I wanted to show you guys that list as well. This list does look a little bit different than the one that we saw before, but again, the more decks you can see, the better idea you're going to get of what these decks are shaping up to look like, and you can kind of see some of the tech choices that players are starting to incorporate. This deck in particular was playing Phantasme, which we don't really see too much of, but I kind of like it. We also have stuff like Book of Moon, which we haven't seen really played in threes all that much, but if there's a deck to play it, I guess it's this one, because you have so many free slots available to do so. We also have stuff like Twin Twister as well, just to clear out back row, and also can potentially get your Zodiacs in the graveyard, so that way they can be revived with things like Chakanine. There's a lot of really cool, neat interactions with that, and so I just want to give you guys a nice bit of variety. There was also another Zodiac list that managed to win a remote duel, and this was the list here. Again, a bit of a different Zodiac list. This is a Zodiac Dogmatical list, a different lineup of hand traps here, because we have Ash Blossom, Effect Veiler, and Ghost Ogre, which a lot of people were on Ghost Ogre for quite some time, but it has definitely been on a decline, at least looking at these particular lists. Also, can't forget Infinite Impermanence, but even Nibiru in the main deck as well. So this player just loaded up on the hand traps, but the Dogmatica cards synergize very well with the Zodiac cards as well, give you a lot more depth in terms of what your deck is able to do, but clearly the pure Zodiac lists were also doing just fine, as we saw from numerous first place lists. So a lot of first place Zodiac coming out of this past weekend, and maybe that's a trend we'll start to see more of as we progress throughout the November format. Now, another extremely hyped deck moving into this weekend was Prank Kids, because a lot of people were looking to that Prank Kids Link 1 monster, turning all the Prank Kids into a one-card starter, and let's just say it did not disappoint. Prank Kids did manage to take a top 16 slot at the Pro Play Tour regional event. This list was kind of cool. It actually played Parallel Xyz, because you're able to trigger the effect of Parallel Xyz so easily now with that Link 1. So taking a play out of Salamangreat's book, but what's neat about this is that you're able to overlay for a card like Traptrix Rafflesia, and with the incorporation of Gravedigger Trap Hole in the main deck, you actually have a pseudo Call by the Grave sort of effect that will insulate your plays so that you can combo off and ensure that you're going to get to that end board that you really want. So a nice piece of tech there, but I really liked it from Marcus's list. Let's go ahead and move on to some other Prank Kids lists. This one is a top 4 list. This one was actually playing King of the Swamp to help get to polymerization, because as you Prank Kid players know, that polymerization can sometimes be one of the most important cards you want to see in that deck. You also see the hand trap lineup, Drolls in the main deck, Ash, Nibiru, Infinite Impermanence, and overall just a pretty solid Prank Kids list. Again, it did take top 4 at a case tournament. Moving on to yet another Prank Kids list. This one took second place, and again, take a look at the hand trap lineup here. This one was on Ash Blossom, DD Crow, Infinite Impermanence, so a little bit less. Also on Dark Ruler No More, though, just as a way to kind of fight back against some of these combo decks that are able to build these massive boards. Also playing the Thunder Dragon Fusion, that makes perfect sense, but it looks like we are seeing a lot of Prank Kids coming out of the opening Phantom Rage weekend. And if that weren't enough, we still have one other list. This one was on the full 3 Thunder Dragon Fusion here. Hand traps were Ash Blossom, Nibiru, and Infinite Impermanence. This one just looked like it was pure gas. I mean, we're playing 3 Pot of Desires as well. We're just trying to get to those one-card starters and those combo pieces as quickly as we can. I really like it. And again, this just shows you guys a nice wide variety of different Prank Kids decks that maybe you can take different bits and pieces of what you liked from one, maybe splash it in with another, and build a Prank Kids deck of your own. But there's still a lot of experimentation going on. There hasn't really been a solidified way to go about this yet, and that's what I really love at the dawn of a new format, or when a new set is released, is that experimentation phase where people don't necessarily know what's optimal yet and are playing around with different ratios, different tech choices, and the like. Now, as we approach the end of the video, some of you guys might be wondering, where the hell is Dino? Because we've been talking about Dragon Link, Infernoble Knight, we've been talking about Invoke Dogmatical, all the former previous best decks that seem to be trending into November. So what about Dinosaur? Well, Dinosaur is in a bit of an interesting position. A lot of people are still playing it. I will show you here a list that went 5-0, but the thing is with Dinosaur, a lot of people have realized that it is actually a very easy deck to side against. When you're playing the correct counter options that can combat the deck, it actually significantly weakens the power that Dinosaur has. And so as a result, a lot more people are prepared for the deck. That doesn't necessarily take away from the power that Dinosaur has, but the problem is that when people are prepared to play against it, it loses a lot of that value. Dinosaur has always been a very explosive deck when people aren't prepared to play against it. And so now that it's like top tier, or at least it has been top tier for the past month or so, people are aware of it. People know that going into a tournament, they're going to see a lot of Dinosaur, and so they're building their side decks accordingly, and there are some cards that Dinosaur just really folds to and can't really play through, and if your opponent happens to get those side deck cards, then it's going to be very difficult for Dino to play. So I don't think Dinosaur's gone anywhere necessarily. I think just all of the other players are keeping Dinosaur at bay with their side decks, and they're really adjusting for the meta appropriately. Here's another Dino deck for you guys to take a look at. Again, just for a bit of variety, you're going to notice some similarities, some differences, but for any of you Dino lovers out there, there are still people playing the deck. And last but not least, we have everyone's favorite deck, because if you haven't already figured it out, it's Sky Striker. Can I just say I love the fact that this Sky Striker list is from an event called the Lasagna Cup. I think that is just hilarious, but nonetheless, Sky Striker still going strong. We see plenty of hand traps in this list. This is actually Sky Striker Dragoon, and I actually believe this is a going second list, because Sky Striker is able to go second very well in all fairness, especially when you have cards like Widow Anchor at 3 now. There's just a lot of upside to the strategy. When it comes to Sky Striker, do not count this deck out. This is a great budget option. This deck is still very capable of taking events. We've seen this happen over the past several months, that people are kind of just neglecting the power of Sky Striker, but even though it's rogue, it's out there, and there's still going to be a lot of people that want to make this deck work, because it's Sky Striker. At the end of the day, people love it. But guys, that's going to wrap it up for this meta analysis. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.